Welcome to G Fun Facts Online. Today we are digging deep into the soil of Anhui Province to listen to a sound that has been silenced for over 2,000 years. We are going to talk about the recent and monumental excavation of Wuwangdun Tomb Number One, the final resting place of King Kaolie of the State of Chu. If you follow archaeology, you know that finding a tomb is exciting, but finding a soundscape is rare. We usually find bones, gold, and weapons. But in Wuwangdun, archaeologists found a preserved orchestra. This isn't just a collection of artifacts. It is a frozen concert from the twilight of the Warring States period, sealed right before China changed forever. Let's start with the context, because to understand the music, you have to understand the conductor, King Kaolie. He reigned from 262 to 238 BC. This was a time of absolute desperation for the State of Chu. Imagine a once massive empire, a southern giant that used to rival the central Zhou kings, now slowly crumbling. By the time Kaolie sat on the throne, the war machine of the Qin state was eating up territory. The Chu capital had to be moved east to Shouchun, which is modern-day Huainan, just to stay out of range of the Qin armies. You might think that a dying empire would be austere or militaristic, focusing every ounce of copper on swords and arrowheads. But history often shows us a paradox. The sunset of a civilization frequently produces its most blindingly beautiful art. King Kaolie's court wasn't a bunker, it was a center of extravagant culture. It was dominated by figures like the Lord of Chunshen, one of the famous four lords of the Warring States. They were living in a world of high political stakes, but also deep superstition and romance. The tomb reflects this perfectly. It is a massive, cross-shaped structure. It has a central burial chamber surrounded by 8 side compartments. This is a layout of imperial ambition. But unlike the terracotta warriors of the Qin, which are rigid and martial, Kaolie's tomb is suffocated with the trappings of pleasure and ritual. He didn't plan to conquer the afterlife with an army, he planned to enchant it. And that is where the orchestra comes in. The musical cache found in Wuwangdun is the largest and most complex ever discovered in a Chu tomb. To give you a comparison, think about the famous tomb of Marquis Yi of Zheng, excavated in 1978. That tomb is famous for its massive bronze bells. It was heavy, loud, and ritualistic. But Marquis Yi died about 200 years before King Kaolie. In those 2 centuries, the musical taste of China shifted completely. Wuwangdun gives us the sound of the end of the era. The orchestra here is lighter. It is more melodic. It is dominated by strings and winds. It represents a shift from the heavy metal ritualism of the Bronze Age to a more personal, expressive musicality of the upcoming era. Let's walk through the instruments themselves, because the details here are staggering. The centerpiece of this lost orchestra is the zither. Archaeologists uncovered over 50 of these instruments in the tomb. 50. That is a full string section. But it is their size that defies belief. Some of these lacquered wooden zithers measure over 2.1 meters in length. That is nearly 7 feet long. Archaeologists are calling them the king of zithers. The SE is an instrument of deep antiquity. It is often mentioned alongside the qin, the 7-string zither. But while the qin was the instrument of the solitary scholar playing for himself in a garden, the seed was the engine of the ensemble. It was powerful. It was resonant. The Wuwangdun Se features 23 to 25 strings, each bridged by a movable wooden fret. Imagine the sound of 25 strings on a 7-foot soundboard. It would produce a deep, thrumming bass overlaid with cascading pentatonic melodies. When researchers cleaned the millennia-old mud from the black lacquer in the lab, they revealed intricate paintings of dragons and phoenixes coiling around the soundboard. There is a fascinating literary connection here. The presence of these 25-string zithers brings to mind a famous poem by Li Sheng, who wrote, "The brocade zither has 50 strings, no one knows why. Each string, each bridge, recalls a year gone by." Scholars have debated that line for centuries. Did a 50-string zither exist? The discovery at Wuwangdun suggests that the 50 strings might have been a poetic doubling of the standard 25-string se found here, or perhaps a reference to a lost giant variant that King Kaolie took to his grave. If the se provided the body of the music, the wind instruments provided its breath. The excavation yielded over 20 bamboo mouth organs, known as the Sheng and the Yu. These were preserved in a waterlogged state, which is a miracle because it kept their delicate pipes intact. The Sheng is the ancestor of the harmonica and the accordion. It is a cluster of bamboo pipes set into a gourd wind chest. But the Yu is the true star of this find. The Yu was larger, deeper, and more commanding than the Sheng. It was the leader of the wind section in ancient times. Historically, the Yu is famous for a Chinese idiom about a man who couldn't play the instrument but pretended to in a 300-man ensemble just to earn a salary. The Wuwangdun discovery puts this story into perspective. With so many Yu found in a single royal tomb, we can see that these were indeed played in large, frenzied groups. Crucially, the Yu went extinct shortly after the Han Dynasty. Its specific construction and playing technique were lost. The Wuwangdun artifacts, with their preserved reeds and pipes, offer the first real chance in 2,000 years to reverse engineer the instrument and hear the bass-heavy drone that underpinned the Chu melodies. Then we have the percussion, and specifically, the tiger-seated, bird-frame drum. No object screams Chu culture quite like this. This is a purely southern instrument. You would never find this in the rigid courts of the Yellow River Valley in the north. The visual is striking. Imagine two crouching tigers, painted in red and black lacquer, serving as the base. Standing on their backs are two magnificent phoenixes or cranes, their long necks arching upward to suspend a large drum between them. The symbolism here is potent. In Chu mythology, the tiger represents the earth and physical power, and perhaps the spirits of the underworld. The phoenix represents the sky, transcendence, and the ascent of the soul. By suspending the drum between them, the musician becomes the mediator between heaven and earth. Every time they beat the drum, they are bridging the gap between the living and the dead. The Wuwangdun example is the largest and most exquisitely decorated ever found. It likely served as the rhythmic heart of the shamanistic rituals that defined Chu religion, where music was used to induce trances and invite deities to descend. Of course, the old gods were not forgotten. The tomb contained 2 sets of 23 bronze bells and a set of 20 stone chimes. But if you compare this to the Marquis Yi tomb from 200 years prior, you see a fascinating evolution. Marquis Yi had a massive 65-bell carillon that required 5 people to play. King Kaolie's bells are smaller and fewer. This does not mean he was poor. He was a king. It signals a change in taste. By the late Warring States, the heavy, slow-moving ceremonial music of the Western Zhou was falling out of fashion. It was being replaced by something called Zingyue, or new music. This was faster, louder, more emotional, and driven by the interplay of silk strings and bamboo pipes. The bells in Wuwangdun were likely used for punctuation and ritual signaling, rather than carrying the main melody. So, what did this Chu symphony actually sound like? Thanks to these discoveries, musicologists are beginning to piece it together. Unlike the solemn, slow music of the Confucian North, the music of Chu was likely ecstatic and highly dynamic. Imagine the combination of multiple 2-meter-long zithers playing together. It would create a wall of sound, a rich, reverberating texture of plucked notes. Over this, the Yu and Sheng would provide a continuous, swelling harmony. Because mouth organs produce sound on both the exhale and the inhale, the sound never stops. It is a constant stream of breath. Punctuating this would be the thunderous strike of the tiger-seated drum and the shimmering crash of the stone chimes. The ancient poet Kuo Yuan, a minister of Chu who lived just decades before King Kaolie, describes such a scene in his poem Summons of the Soul. He wrote, "The pipes and zithers rise in wild harmony. The drums thunder, shaking the hall. The singers chant the songs of the south, while dancers in silk whirl like the wind." For centuries, these lines were just poetry. We read them and imagined. But with the Wuwangdun excavation, we now have the physical props of this performance. We can see the lacquerware wine cups that would have been passed around. We can hold the bamboo flutes that accompanied the dancers. We are not just looking at objects. We are looking at a frozen party, a feast for the ghosts that has waited 2,200 years to resume. I want to touch on the science of this for a moment, because the preservation here is a triumph of modern archaeology. When the tomb was opened, the wooden instruments were waterlogged. They were soft as cheese and dark as mud. In the past, if you expose such items to air, they might shrink, crack, and disintegrate within hours. However, the Wuwangdun project utilized a low-oxygen archaeological laboratory built directly over the excavation site. Researchers worked in controlled environments. They used infrared imaging to read the ink inscriptions on the coffin boards before they could fade. These inscriptions were crucial. They provided an inventory of the tomb's contents and identified the chambers. The music chamber was identified not just by the instruments, but by the layout. The careful placement suggests that the orchestra was not just stored, but staged. It was set up ready to be played by the wooden figurines found nearby, representing the musicians who would serve the king in the afterlife. This discovery fills a critical missing link in Chinese music history. Before this, we had the early Warring States bells and the Han Dynasty pottery figurines of musicians. Wuwangdun sits right in the middle. It shows the transition from the Bronze Age logic of bells and drums to the Iron Age logic of silk and bamboo. This shift mirrors the political changes. As the old feudal order collapsed and the centralized empire rose, music became less about marking social hierarchy and the number of bells you owned, and more about entertainment, emotion, and personal expression. The instruments found here are the direct ancestors of the music played at the Han imperial court, the music that would define Chinese culture for the next 4 centuries. The Sheng and Yu found here are the grandfathers of the guzheng and sheng played today. The excavation of Wuwangdun is ongoing, and the conservation of these delicate instruments will take years. But the initial findings have already rewritten the textbooks. We have resurrected a lost orchestra. King Kaolie may have failed to save his kingdom from the Qin armies. The State of Chu fell in 223 BC, just 15 years after his death. But in the darkness of Wuwangdun, his culture survived. The Chu Symphony captures a moment of dazzling brilliance before the end. It is a civilization celebrating its identity, its mythology, and its romance through wood, silk, and bronze. As we gaze upon the tiger-seated drum and the giant zithers, we are reminded that while empires turn to dust, music, the most ephemeral of arts, can, with a little luck, echo forever. The lost orchestra is playing again, and the world is finally listening.